I think we've got some more questions from the audience. Have we got... sorry, there was a gentleman here and then there's a gentleman behind you. We'll get to you in just a moment.
Just following on that theme that you were talking about then, 1969 versus now, I'm just wondering, have we got the mix right? You know, back in the 60s you had school, a family unit, not too many other outside distractions. Then you had military service or university or whatever you were going to do. Now the world seems a much smaller place with media, internet, all the things, the pressures that are on teenagers to grow up sooner. Do we have to look at the mix of how long they're at school and what their transitions, how their transitions handled into adulthood and maturity? I mean, you know, is it time to revisit that model?
Is that a call for national conscription?
No, I'm just wondering if, you know, if the problem is that the world's sped up but the model hasn't changed.
Who'd like to make a comment on that?
Well, I can make one comment. I think that one of the things that is happening, and this is apparent in some of the patterns that we're seeing in adolescence when you talk about growing up, is that the dependence of adolescence is really extending. While their exposure to problems and also the rapid communication is occurring at a greater speed, we're finding that they're leaving home at later ages, for example. Their dependency on their parents is longer, it's taking longer than perhaps in let's say 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, it wasn't uncommon for young people to go out and get a job at 16 and have their own income, for example. And now it might be the mid-20s and possibly later. So those are some of the things that are happening. So there is a contradiction, some kind of contradiction, which may be part of the strains. I don't know. It certainly is there.
We've got a gentleman here who has been waiting a while, I think.
I was just going to go back a little bit to what Don had said earlier about depression and signs, and then Antoinette said don't wait for the signs, engage early. I'm interested in how you might detect depression versus the typical moodiness of a teenager. What are the differentiators there that might be a trigger?
I mean, I think monosyllabic teenagers can be really tough to detect that in. And Antoinette, I was thinking while you were talking about those channels of communication, which is certainly something I've really endeavoured to do with my kids, but I get grunted at as much as the next mother.
Yep.
And I wonder how you address that.
I guess I'd be looking at the time frame would be one of the main indicators as to how long it's been going on for, but also the gravitas involved in that emotion and how stickable it is. If the young person is still able to feel a range of emotions and engage in things that they like, but strategically be really moody around stuff that they don't like, and that's completely normal, I'm sorry to have to tell you. Get used to that. But if there's a sense
of depression that they won't go to church anymore?
No. Or do the washing up, yeah. But if there's a sense of stickedness around where their mood's at, and the difficulties that you're noticing are sustained over days and weeks, and that there's a distinct change in their engagement with other people, that would also be a warning sign. So they can be really annoyed with you and really moody with you over something, but actually still seem to have that full range of pleasurable emotions in other things that they like doing. So that would be a sign that would point me more on that normal continuum than the depressed continuum.
And just a reminder that you can interact with us via Twitter. The hashtag is ANUWWWT. A question up here?
Thank you. On a similar note, I was wondering if any of the members of the panel could kind of elaborate on, do you think that teenagers' mental health these days have to do with the increasing amount of broken homes, as that is a precursor to quite a lot of issues later in life?
Actually, that's an interesting step to take. Jessica, I wanted to ask you about the relationships that matter to teenagers most and the impact perhaps on teenagers when those relationships fracture.
I think certainly things like a lack of stability in the family home are definitely a risk factor. We know that, you know, for a range of difficulties, but I was thinking about this question the other day, and so I looked at some of the data that I've got and I analysed whether there was a difference in the psychological health of the children in my sample, the adolescents in my sample who lived with their father and those who didn't, because about 95% live with their biological mother and then only about 60% live with their dad. And I found no difference between those groups. I mean, that was a pretty crude analysis, like it's a very simple, thing with a few variables, but I think that was heartening. But certainly I would say that it can be a risk factor, and it really depends on the exact environment and the specifics of each family.
So if we break it down to the absolute basics, are you saying that one loving, consistent person, one person who's there for you is enough? Can be enough.
It can be
Might
enough.
be enough.
Might be enough.
There's certainly research that suggests that that's a strong protective or resilience factor, that if a child has at least one person that they trust and that's supportive for them, then they have much better outcomes. And they're going to need to be very worried about people who don't have that one relationship.
I think one is better than none, but two would be better
Two
than one.
is better than one, and a whole suite of people looking after you is what's really great. Question here?
There seems to be a lot of focus these days on teenagers, being rebellious, and that you talked about it before, the minority, really, like most people do come out of adolescence okay. Just wanted to ask the panel members, do you think that parents need to take some, I'm not saying every parent, but some parents need to take a little bit more responsibility? I've found working with children that parent and the student relationship in a school, that's where I come from, they seem to be more friends. Like you ring up the parents and they act as if, oh, I know everything because I'm friends with my daughter or my son, and they tell me everything, and you try and, bring up a behaviour issue that might be a problem at school, and you're not right because they know everything about their kids, because there's not that relationship between mother or father, and it's more of a friend relationship, more as best friends.
That's actually such an interesting topic to bring up, and I think we've had this long period of people wanting to be their child's best friend, and I would love the panel's thoughts on this one, because I think the setting of clear boundaries is probably one of the really important tasks of parenting, and being your child's best friend might seem like a nice idea, but Stephanie, comments?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, because we know that children really need those clear boundaries in order to feel safe in their environment, and that's when they can start to develop their own identity, when they feel safe in the space. And so then when you start moving through adolescence, that relationship changes, and it can be quite difficult to navigate that shift, letting your teenager become independent in their own person, but letting them know that you're still there, and that you're not so far away, and that you're still connected.
Charlie, would you want your parents to be your best friend? Or is that a bit creepy?
Gosh, I think it does happen. I don't think it probably happens in the majority of cases, probably because there is such a shared history growing up and going through tough times together. But probably if you're able to make that distance and stay in, be a friend, then definitely.
So maybe it's wishful thinking on the parents' behalf. I mean, genuinely, that could be parents. Antoinette?
Well, I think so. I think parents can have very strong, closely bonded, loving relationships with their children, but their best friend should be their peers, because they serve a different role. And I think if the parent's not able to be the parental model for the young person, then who do they need a parental model. They need someone, a mentor, someone that they can look up to, and I think that's a fabulous relationship that a parent can have with the child. And sometimes you have fallings out with your best friends, and you need a parent to be able to rely on that's stable and unconditionally supports you. So I think there's probably a bit of a problem with the best friend model.